Welcome back to our channel. Help us print our next issue by buying us a coffee. Thank you for supporting Archetype.
How did writing start for you? What first drew you to it?
So I was thinking about that. I think what happened was there were two incidences. One, when I was a kid, um, it was just kind of more natural. Like, I don't know how exactly, but I would write stories. And I remember I started writing a novel. Like, there's this one publisher in Quebec for like young teens called Les Intouchables, that they have all kinds of books that were really fascinating, like sort of fantasy adventure novels and series. And me and a bunch of my friends would read those, and there was a sense that we'd enter these worlds. And when you're a kid, like, even thinking back at the books I read as a kid, there's so much more anchored, the images and the texture of the book and the whole environment that's created, like, you really absorbed it. And so I think, like, meandering through these different worlds, I started doing some writing on my own. My mom, when I was young, when we'd like get in trouble, she would ground us. She'd say, go to your room, whatever. And then she'd say, you're not coming out until you write a story about anything, really. Just like, you have to basically write a story to, I guess, expunge like whatever bad emotion, like not bad emotions, but whatever was going on. You have to kind of release it. So it was like immediately an outlet that was pointed at. So that was good. But then after that, it was, I dropped writing for a long time. I didn't think about it. And it was only like at the end of high school where I think what happened was that I started reading again. And it was as simple as I would read these writers that I admired, and I was just envious of them. I would read them and I thought, oh man, he's really right on the dot there. And he's like, that's crazy what's going on here. And I wanted to be able to do that, or to express myself in that kind of way. So it was just it picked back up at that point from envy or admiration.
Great. And that's an awesome tactic for your mom. She's not just in the room, she's making it very productive, which is awesome.
Yeah, well, it was funny because this one time she sent me to my room, and this was a bit of a different activity. She said, you're grumpy, or something's not right this morning. She told me, go in your room and write 10 things you're grateful for. And so I was like 6 or 7, and so I walked up to my room, all unhappy and whatnot, and I sit down at my desk. And then time's passing, and my mom's going, what the hell? Like, I just had to write 10 things and then I was out. But it had been hours, And so finally she comes in the room. She's like, my goodness, like, it was just meant to be a little punishment. Like, it's no big deal. She looks over my shoulder. She said, what are you writing? And I had only written one thing, and it was, I'm grateful for my parents. But then the second one, I was thinking, and I was looking out the window, and I couldn't for the life of me think of what I was grateful for. So I was pondering it way too much. But
you were just sitting there for hours thinking.
Yeah. I was like, well, what am I grateful for?
Wow. That's very telling. That makes your piece that we're publishing much more. It illuminates something in it.
Right. Yeah.
Very funny.
Directly in conversation.
While we're on the topic of your piece, I'm hoping that we can touch on it a bit. We won't spoil anything, but I'd love to get a better sense of sort of your mindset going into it and what you were thinking about when you were writing the piece.
The thing about this piece is that it's full of anecdotes of travel stories of people I met along the way, of their ideas about the self, of different people's ideas about art, and stuff like that. And so really there was a moment when I saw that there was this thread running through all of these experiences where they were all kind of echoing each other, in that, from traveling, from being in kind of different subcultural groups, like the tree planters, the hitchhikers, you end up in hostels all over the place. You end up having all these conversations with people who are telling you what's what in terms of, their conceptions about life. They kind of paraphrase, a hybrid sort of mix of a bunch of philosophers that wouldn't normally get along, but when this person articulates it, he has this whole new idea about what it means to be alive and all this stuff. And I realized that I had been in that world for so long, and that I had all these different voices kind of bouncing back and forth, and I didn't really have a good conception for myself of what was my relation like to art, for example,
Mhm.
because at the time, concretely, I was really exploring cinema, and that was when I was starting to write this piece, and I thought it was a really curious thing because you could kind of go through the list of like the great movies, and with cinema, I find more than literature, it's like you're really pressed to formulate an opinion because it's kind of a short experience. Um, and there's all kinds of hype around different movies. I think in the piece, like I quote some Fellini's or Miyazaki with Spirited Away, and just the experience of like knowing something is great and then watching it and then just registering like, am I do I agree? Do I not agree? Like, how do I feel? What do I feel about anything? What's my opinion on literature or movies? And what I ended up doing before writing this piece was I started like tracing back, okay, what in my life are like things that I've enjoyed? What are my favorite
Mhm.
movies from like all of my lived experience? And I looked at my Spotify, I remember, and I was like, okay, what are like my favorite like throwback songs and all that stuff? And where did I start liking those? And I was just trying to figure out why I was who I was in terms of my interests and in terms of my response to different art, and that led me kind of down a whirlpool where I started thinking about all these characters that I met and trying to piece together, something out
Yeah,
of all that.
totally. And
Yeah,
I think that definitely comes across. One of the things that I found really refreshing about the piece is that even though you're coming at it, especially at the top of the piece, you sort of ask, um, like, what does it mean to be authentic? What does it mean
yeah,
to find meaning in life? Like, those are very broad questions that you can
right,
easily, try to give a simple answer to, and people might
yeah,
just, be like, okay, yeah, we've heard that before. But you
yeah,
don't admit to knowing the answers. You sort of just go from character to character, explaining their
yeah,
thought process about life, and then um, trying to come up with something that makes sense to yourself. And it makes it much more unique and much more of a natural progression in the piece.
yeah. Yeah, well, I think the tone that I tried to hit to is like, this is a kind of conversation where to me it gets charged when you take it too seriously. It's like
Yeah,
it's these questions. To some extent, there needs to be a detachment, and so that was where I tried to aim at. Like a lot of these stories are pretty comical. And
100%. Yeah,
so it's kind of like playing with also just the absurdity of like asking these questions and pretending to know. And so I had a lot of fun with it. In other words, as well.
yeah,
And it was
that's
a good
great.
way to kind of just tap into that distance and see it from afar, kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And backtracking a bit, you had mentioned that you had sort of thought about movies, and you made a list of
Mm,
your favorite movies. Do any of those come
yeah.
to mind right now?
um yeah, I mean, like just off the top of my head, it's funny, someone asked me this yesterday, and off the
Mhm.
top of my head what came to mind was Tarkovsky's Stalker,
Mm.
um which is it's a really philosophical, kind of grim, very Russian film.
Yeah.
But it's really quite a ride. It's very trippy. I really like Abash Kiarostami, um, who's an Iranian filmmaker. And he has a whole bunch of movies, but recently I saw Certified Copy, which is about a guy who talks about the writer who writes about like copies of art, and is it still art, like if it's a copy of the thing, and
Mhm.
and it's a whole exploration of like also personhood and how we're copies of each other. Like it becomes this very complex exploration. And what I really admired specifically about Kiarostami is, um, even more than in my piece, like he really doesn't end on a note where he has the answer. Like he really just, it's purely just an exploration, and it
Yeah.
ends kind of just openly, and you're still just in that space of, okay, like what is this? And so I really like that. And then just from purely sentimental, like anything by Godard, I really like.
Mm.
And that's because like, if you have a movie like Breathless, I don't know, have you seen
I literally
Breathless?
just watched it last week.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
No way.
it was fantastic.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. So what someone like Bilal, what I really like is I love his dialogue because what he does is he'll just have a conversation usually between man and woman, and
Mhm.
in any other film it's maybe the character asks like, do you love me, and the person says yes, and it kind of moves on. But with Godot, he'll
Yeah.
go like, do you love me, and then yes, and then what about me, and then I like your eyes,
Mhm.
and why do you like my eyes, what about something else, and they just like keep going until they get like to the deepest point of that question. And in Breathless there's so many good conversations when they're kind of in bed, in the
Yeah.
sheets and stuff like that, where yeah, he really takes like the kind of surface level interactions to the more profound sort of level, but always with a playful edge. And so that's really refreshing watching
That's
that.
so good. I was trying to figure out what it was about the dialogue that I loved so much, and it did feel like there wasn't an end point to their conversation.
No,
They were just chatting with each other, and it made
yeah,
it feel
like
a lot more personal.
it made it feel more personal. You really get the impression that whenever someone says something, like they're always like, okay, you're not going all the way. Let's go a bit deeper, and that back and forth, I really find it's awesome. And there's no one who does it quite like him that I know of. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah,
So in your essay, just going back for a second while we're on the topic of movies,
yeah.
you talk about Celine Dion's "On ne change pas," and I remember the first time I heard that song was in "Mommy" by Xavier
Yeah,
Dolan. Have you seen that
for
movie?
sure. Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Of course. Anytime.
really good.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I mean, that
stuff.
one's incredible. That's I actually took a class in Canadian cinema when I was at the UBC, and the prof said, he said, we're gonna watch all kinds of movies for your overall education, but just know that Mommy is the best movie we're gonna watch this semester.
Nice.
no, no question about it.
Was he right?
And I totally. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there was all kinds of good ones, but
Yeah.
Mommy was on another level for sure.
Awesome. Well, we're talking about movies and writing and art, and so I think I want to ask the big question.
Yeah.
What do you think the purpose of art is in our lives? Why not?
That's what I'd be curious. What I think of right off the top of my head is I remember I met a guy when I was in Salmon Arm in BC, and I hitched a ride, and the guy told me, "Do you want to come see my friend? He's a painter. He lives in the bush. Maybe you could stay with him." And anyways, guy ends up bringing me to this friend who lives out there, and I ended up staying with him for weeks. And he was this painter who just lived alone, and every day he'd just be out in his studio painting. And he said that he claimed to have the largest collection in the world of definitions of what art is. And so he had like this database with like all the quotes by famous people, but also everyone he had ever met. He asked
Wow.
like what it was, and so he asked me and my pals who were there. Well, first of all, I think it's really a personal thing. What I find with art is that people don't usually stumble there consciously out of a kind of a choice. It's more out of necessity that people end up doing art, or at least sustaining an artistic practice. There's really something powerful in just this association of an outward kind of outlet for those really peripheral emotions that we can't quite touch, and really like the kind of unknown that we live in. I find that there's so much play that I feel when I write, for example, poems. And there's so many times like in a day where, a lot of poems that I write, I'll just be walking around and I'll like catch a word in a bush or something. Like I'll be looking at something, or I'll look at the sky, and something just like usually one word or one image will kind of emerge or just present itself. And then I just start from there. From there, it's just like a springboard to jump into this little like parallel universe where suddenly I always try to make sure that I'm just playing, and that I'm just kind of jumping around and meandering and playing with words and hearing them echo. And so to me, it's just like there's a real release. There's a lot of pleasure, but it's also something that I couldn't not do, because I just know that when I don't write for a long time, like I feel pain, I feel like a sense of like loss almost.
Yeah.
So there's really an inner drive, and so I think it's just a necessary articulation of the creative side. So um, yeah,
Awesome.
but it's funny because it makes me think of the book. I don't know if you read this one, My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Moshfegh.
No.
She wrote this whole book that was kind of famous, maybe 2 years back, or I don't know when. And it's kind of more or less all about art, but it's just about this woman who does nothing, like, and takes a bunch of drugs and just kind of is locked in an apartment. And she works in all these galleries, more or less. But anyways, it's sort of an exploration of art. She's with all these conceptual artists, and there's all kinds of pretensions going on, and she's extremely cynical about the whole game. And she says this is all nonsense. But at the end of the book, there's this really powerful moment when she's just looking at this huge work of art in the museum, and she keeps stepping closer to it. And she's getting past like all these webs of associations and of ideas about what art is. And the book pretty much finishes on the note where she just, with her index, she just like touches the painting. And after the whole book, which is so cynical and stuff like that, when she touches the painting, suddenly there's a release of all these pretensions, and there's just kind of an immediate closeness. And she's like, it's not this world of ideas, like it's right here. It's like I feel it with my finger,
Wow.
And I remember that I was really surprised because, like, oh, this book, I don't know what's going on, but that moment really struck me. It really touched me, and I thought it was a powerful kind of way of looking at it, where there's really a direct contact with the person, and that really is what matters.
And I think just one or two more questions for you. Are you
Right.
working on anything currently in terms of writing, or any creative
Yeah.
projects?
Yeah, right now, I wrote because I threw myself into the French kind of language and the French world. So over this summer, I wrote tons of poems, and it's been really fun because right now I'm at the point where I was in France all summer and stuff like that, and now I'm back, and I looked through all my books and found all the stray poems and put them all into one document, and then started kind of reworking them. And it's been really exciting because it's really a humongous body of poetry, and it's like I'm trying to see if there's enough resonance and substance to kind of just compile them into a short collection that I could send out. So that's the project right now, and it's really fun. It's really fun.
Awesome. And are they English and French?
This one is just French. This one is really just French. Yeah. It was really a new experiment because I found I guess with anyone who has multiple languages, like from going from just using English, like once you jump into French, it's like a new world. Like you're entering a full new space where the language, you express yourself completely differently, and it's just like it was really fun to just see how much space there was to play and experiment and really rediscover language. And it gives you that added distance of like, okay, poetry, it doesn't really matter what language you're doing it in. Like every language has its own thing, but here it gives you that extra detachment and sense of like, wow, okay, here the vowels and the whole syntax and stuff will have a different music to it. And the way that what rhymes and what rhymes too much, in French, you go overboard with past participles all ending in a, and and so there's all kinds of different things that it's like rediscovering poetry.
That's awesome.
So I stuck to that. Yeah,
cool. That sounds like a fun way of writing poetry, doing it in a whole different language.
Yeah. There you go. That's my tip.
Awesome. Cool. Well, those were all the questions I had for you. I'm not sure if you had anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up the interview.
You ask all these people about their definitions of art. Do you have one that's like anchored there, or are you just, I feel like it's maybe like my piece, you just keep hearing all these different people that are telling you about art, and now they kind of echo maybe, and you're trying to find your own definition within that.
It's funny.
Cool.
So yeah, I'm definitely just listening to people talk and just taking their opinions. And I don't think I've spent much time thinking about my own definition. Like
Yeah.
when I write out the question, that I'll be like, oh, what's my definition? I'll think about it for like 10 seconds, and then I'll just move on. But I
Yeah.
haven't like sat down and thought about it.
Sure.
But if I were to try and define it, I think I really agree with what you said about there's sort of like an inner drive we have to create art. One, because we're trying to make sense of our lives, and two, we're also striving towards creating beautiful things. I think it has to do with sort of creating moments that we can always turn to in art. So like when you see a beautiful shot in a movie, or you read something
Yeah.
in a book that really resonates with you, there are all these moments that we're sort of collecting in our journey through art. And that's something that's
Right.
big for me.
Mm,
And so that's
yeah.
why I think it's so like it's really not, you can never exhaust art, the creation of art, because we're always trying to create these moments and discover moments that ring true to us in terms of, you know, living life and being human and all that jazz. So
Sure.
yeah, I think it always goes back to that inner drive of trying to make sense of ourselves and the world and striving towards something beautiful.
That's interesting, these moments that you're talking about, because I do remember actually reading that, I think somewhere, maybe on the Archetype site, where you kind of place some emphasis on that. So I'll be interested to see when the journal, this one comes out, what kind of, how that fits into your, you know, selection of writers, and how different writers capture different moments. Because, you know, I think that's really interesting. And it makes me think of, you know, a bunch of directors who like just don't really care about the whole narrative and just go with like a bunch of scenes that they find really touching or intense. You know what I mean? Like in literature too, right? When you just split from narrative in favor of really powerful moments, that you kind of put into conversation with one another. So, and that's interesting.
You write about the website. We at one point we quote Jung, where he says, "Where what nature leaves imperfect, the art perfects." And my idea of what that means, which I think isn't what he meant, but I don't care, is that we, through our art, we elevate like our experiences of life, and we're trying to capture the essence of whatever moment we're you know, writing about or making a film about. And so that's always in the back of my mind. And you were right when you said that when we do try and accept pieces, we're looking for work that's telling us something. It's making a statement of some sort. It doesn't have to be, it can be personal, political, whatever it might be. They're just trying to say something that is as close to the truth, whatever that might be as possible. Yeah, that's great. There you go. Thank you for asking me that. Don't think I've ever articulated it before out loud. No, that's good. Yeah, I like that combination of like, there's the basic, you know, drive, but then there's also this this aesthetic kind of elevation and these moments. Yeah, I resonate with that. That's awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for this interview. It was fantastic. You always have something interesting to say, so I appreciate it. Good. I'm glad you think so. And yeah, our next issue comes out October 22nd, and your personal essay is going to be in it, Brief Glimpses of Life. So everyone can look forward to that. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ali. Right on. I look forward to reading the finished copy. Awesome.